President Trump understands this at least intuitively. I think he has a much greater understanding than he has specifically identified. But nevertheless, the fact that he's talking about tariffs, the fact that he's already in a fight with the Federal Reserve, and that he is willing, look at the latest statement on the Ukraine thing coming out of Marco Rubio, where he's saying, look, if you guys don't get serious and get to a solution here, we're just going to walk out of this thing. We're tired of your war. It's not our war, it's your war.
Hello and welcome to Take Control of Your Liberty with Scott Tregurtha, where we help critical thinkers by giving you the most true and accurate information we can find, which they should be giving you on mainstream media, but are not. So you can decide for yourself and take control of your liberty, your freedom, and your future. And now, here is Scott Tregurtha.
Hello, everybody. One big problem we still need to resolve in this country is getting us back onto the American system, which was put into place by Alexander Hamilton and concerned forefathers. Today, we have a husband and wife team, Martha and Peter Bowen, who are actually part of a much larger team, which has as one of its largest purposes getting us back onto that American system. And Martha and Peter, along with some of their teammates, recently went to D.C. and lobbied in the Congress and Senate. And today they are going to show and tell us how we, the people, can help Trump make positive changes in this country, as they just did on that trip. Hey guys, welcome to Take Control of Your Liberty.
Hi.
Hi there. Good to be here.
Good to have you. So, we're of course going to be talking about your trip to DC, representing Promethean Action, and you'll be telling us more about that. And I have a few questions for you, and you have a lot of information for us. But to begin with, and we're going to go further into what your mission really is, the overall mission of Promethean Pact. But what was your specific mission in this visit to DC with you and several other people visiting Congress and the Senate?
Well, we had 7 of us. So we had teams that we broke up into 3 teams. And we were able to, our mission was, we had about 1,300 pieces of literature, including this leaflet, Make Congress Great Again, including this pamphlet, American System 2.0, and the police dossier, It's the British That Kill American Presidents. And our mission was to go to as many offices as we could. We had no idea how many we would be able to get to by the end of the week. But our mission was to go to all the Republican offices, that is House and Senate, that we could, as well as some of the Democrats, which we did, including your congressman, the Coleman's office. Right? So, and thankfully, we had a number of our constituents, our supporters, who contacted their congressional offices and helped set up meetings for us. So I would say we probably had 30 plus meetings between the 3 teams over the 5 days, which these meetings could take anywhere from 15 minutes to a half an hour, depending what the aide usually, sometimes we met congressmen, what time they would give us. And in one case, we had a meeting for 45 minutes, which was rather extraordinary. We'll tell you about that later. So our mission was, we had to get in a thoughtful manner all this literature to the people that we wanted to make sure had it in their hands, had it in their offices, and with the emphasis on what to look at in reading it that we briefed them on when we were in their office.
And it's important to understand here that because Promethean Action, which comes out of the movement of Lyndon LaRouche in the latter half of the 20th century, that we have a peculiar understanding, a more profound understanding of what the real American system is in terms of economics. And what what's critically lacking in Congress and in the general population is an understanding of what it means to talk about the American system. That's not current language. And so our battle was to open the discussion, the dialogue that puts the real ideas that are behind what Trump is doing on the table and start to provoke responses to get people to challenge us, to get people to study it, to get people to join with us in this fight, because it's not something that is going to be taken care of in the next 30 days. It's going to be a battle.
And what is the fight?
Well, the fight, in my view, is to help President Trump rally the leadership in his grassroots movement into a force that actually understands the economics that are essential in this. President Trump understands this at least intuitively. I think he has a much greater understanding than he has specifically identified. But nevertheless, the fact that he's talking about tariffs, the fact that he's already in a fight with the Federal Reserve, and that he is willing to, I mean, look at the latest statement on the Ukraine thing coming out of Marco Rubio, where he's saying, look, if you guys don't get serious and get to a solution here, we're just going to walk out of this thing. We're tired of your war. It's not our war, it's your war. So which indicates that President Trump has a very clear path in his mind, and it's based on restoring manufacturing in the United States and the highest level of science. So,
And I would also add that, as in the front of our pamphlet on American System 2.0, which, by the way, these pamphlets are available on our website in PDF. Uh, we focus on Alexander Hamilton and the report on manufacturers. Our mission has been for almost 50 years, with Lyndon LaRouche's fight, has been to bring that language back into the vernacular. And for example, Hamilton talks about that the key of economic activity is to stimulate the creativity of the human mind. Now, we talked to an aide, I remember this distinctly, and he was saying, "Oh, economics is not my area." He was involved in energy largely, and so I think it was Sarah asked him, "So what do you think of economics?" And he said, "Supply and demand." And that's usually what
Uh-huh.
you get, money, right? Rather than a system that actually uses national banking or some principle of national banking, a credit system. This is what Hamilton established and was again done a few times in our history, where by promoting the manufacturers, by promoting the infrastructure, by promoting the up training up the skill level of the workforce, we became it several times in our history through this method the greatest producing power on the planet. So that's what we wanted to get across to these people that had the opportunity to speak with. In some cases, a few minutes, because in some offices we didn't have meetings. So we go in, introduce ourselves. We had a business card with all our social media on it, all our contact information, the literature. But 5 or 10 minutes, sometimes we ended up in a pretty interesting engagement with perhaps the intern at the front desk, or sometimes aides would come out and talk with us. So that kind of gives you a sense of the process of what we were doing.
and
Got it. And no, go ahead.
yeah, I wanted to add just one thing, is because this here, um, this, if everybody can read that, I hope. Um, the British having roles in the assassination of American presidents is very urgent, because, first of all, you have to understand how deeply embedded the British are in Ukraine. And as everybody can see, they're very publicly, strongly advocating to continue the bloodshed, to continue the meat grinder there.
Mm.
Uh, as much as they possibly can. But if you look at the Routh assassination at the golf course, if you look at this fellow who had killed his parents in Wisconsin and was working with people in Ukraine to pull off an assassination of Trump and some others in the administration and blame it on Russia, and they were doing this through Ukraine. And of course, they've given almost no information out on Crook, so we don't know the details on that at all. But the point is, there's a very sophisticated machine operating that wants Trump dead, and that is not going away until we expose it, until it's clearly ripped out, just the way yesterday the Global Engagement Center was shut down by the State Department, which is the vehicle that was established to organize the censorship of dissenting opinions over various issues, whether it's the elections or the Ukrainian war or the Middle East or whatever. This Global Engagement Center was what was built up in the State Department for the purpose of the government shutting up voices they didn't want heard. And that got shut down. That got shut down. Now, boy, that makes some people very angry because that's control that they don't want to lose.
That's right. And I'm happy. If they're angry, I'm happy. Um, so, okay. So, and these are all not only interesting topics, extremely necessary. So, um, let me just kind of clarify here, like, because I can just hear people saying, well, Trump's like he's doing everything, and he's got this team. And by the way, as you and I know, he is like he's totally, it's almost as if he's part of Promethean pack. He's just like going in there and he's like doing what LaRoche has said to do for ages, but nobody would. And he's doing it. And I do realize he was uh indoctrinated to at least some degree way back when he was in New York City building his empire. I know, because on the discussion groups, I know we've all heard people who actually disseminated LaRoche to him, and he used to stop by their tables and buy their literature and so on, right?
Yep.
So it got into his brain,
Oh, yeah.
right? And 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 not to take anything away from him, he's a very thinking person. He has probably studied history on his own and so on, and he's really got the right idea. So he's moving along fine. He's got this cabinet that's right there with him, not working against him.
Yeah.
So your major role here, our major role in Promethean Action would be to help make sure that occurs and make sure the Senate and the Congress are grooved into that because he's like just moving. They're not necessarily keeping up with him.
No.
And you never know how votes are going to turn out there, right?
Yeah. Right.
And we need the House and the Senate we actually need them to help him be successful
Right.
in all this. So for one thing, so they all get elected again
Yeah.
in the midterm, right?
No, we need
We
more.
can't have, yeah, we need more of them. We can't have half-assed, halfway doing things, and we're not all on board. We need them all on board. And would you say that's a major part of what you're doing here?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean,
Getting them all on board.
it's see the it's so urgent for Trump to succeed over the next 18 months to actually start our economy in a fundamental way, to put to rest the centers of war provocation that are right now in operation in Ukraine and in the Middle East, and to open the U.S. government up to its its owners. You know, it's the what's called transparency. And the only way we get that is if the people on the ground are continuously alert to what needs to be done. And unfortunately, it's very hard for the average American because the media is so well, the thing that Marco Rubio was pointing to the other day, I think it was Marco Rubio, he was saying, look, there's so much disinformation. I turn on regular broadcast TV, and what do I hear? I hear that there was this Maryland man sent against his will to El Salvador, and a senator is chasing him down there to try to get him back. Well, no, it wasn't a Maryland man. It was a citizen of El Salvador who was a member of this, MS-13, was working with them, and he had a deportation order against him standing. It wasn't just issued, and they picked him up and sent him home. And instead of saying it, they'd say, oh, no, this was a Maryland man living with his family in Maryland. Now, he may have had his wife and child there, but he was an illegal immigrant, and he was a gang member of a terrorist organization. So,
And to your question, because just take our Senator Cruz. Senator Cruz right now is fighting Trump on the tariffs. And right? And you've got Rand Paul.
Yep.
I mean, these libertarians, and there's a lot of this in the Congress. We met several aides of this bent, which is they're not with Trump on the tariffs. They don't understand it. And as I think Peter was saying, that the shovels have to hit the ground. The American people actually have to see this is going to work. And that means that these elected officials and these aides that we met with and the elected officials, they've got to move this. So, for example, here in Texas, I'm very excited that our Attorney General, Ken Paxton, is running for U.S. Senate, because even worse
Yeah.
than Cruz, and I say, a lot of people like Cruz, and he's a constitutional law expert, and he did defend Trump, and I'll say those good things for him. But when he goes against the tariffs, I think he's answering to a different donor class than his constituents, if you know what I mean. But
I guess
I do.
yeah, right. His wife works for what?
Goldman Sachs.
Goldman Sachs. That's right. But as for Cornyn, I mean, this guy is nowhere on the right page. So Ken Paxton represents, I think, the kind of Republican coming into the Senate race now that can kick ass, and that's what they need. They need some leaders in the House and Senate that are going to be 100% on this fight for the tariffs. Where might this lead on the Federal Reserve question? Well, this might lead to the question of a national banking system of some type. This has happened several times in our history. And that's what we were really focusing on in talking with the various offices, is the history of how national banking has been implemented under, obviously, Alexander Hamilton and George Washington, John Quincy Adams, again under Lincoln, a national banking system, and the greenbacks. Of course, McKinley had the tariffs and had a national banking system, but of course he was killed, as was Lincoln. But interestingly, under Franklin Roosevelt, there was what Roosevelt did is he used the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which actually had been created under Hoover, as the banking mechanism to provide the credit. It was headed up by Jesse Jones of Houston, and a banker, worked in the lumber
Republican.
and a Republican working in a Democratic administration. And that was a mechanism that really worked beautifully. And of course, then later, John F. Kennedy, who we know had written an executive order to replace the Federal Reserve notes with national Treasury notes. So presumably he was on the pathway to fight the Federal Reserve in a substantial way, but he was killed. So now Trump has taken on the fight with Jerome Powell. And what we're hoping we did there in D.C. and now back, because one of the emphasis we made to all these offices we met, this literature is already going out to your constituents. So they're going to hold you accountable for what we're demanding. And one of the demands in our leaflet was the idea that what Congress has the power to do is something called a capital budget. And LaRouche wrote a whole series. He wrote an article actually called The Lost Art of the Capital Budget. And it's being summarized right now in a series by Barbara Boyd on our website. But the basic idea is, most people and most congressmen, they think in terms of, you sit down at the kitchen table and you look at your checkbook and you see what money's come in. That's the money you have to spend. But a capital budget operates in a very different idea of a long-term, low-interest credit, a tranche of credit that will be delegated to particular projects that might take 20 or 30 years to build. And they cannot be interrupted by a change of administration. You have to have these, what were once known as a capital budget system. So that was part of what we were educating these people on when we were sitting down with them in their offices.
So that capital budget system, is that basically on the concept of the national banking system or
Well,
related?
I think the way to think about what I find a very useful way to think about this is that, our Federal Reserve, the way it works is, the Congress says we need money to do this or that, and we don't have it, so we're going to borrow it from the Federal Reserve. We're going to print it and borrow it, and
Right.
and then we use it to spend on this project or that project. And my view of this issue of the cap, of course, I think the Federal Reserve should just be done away with, but that's another issue. Um,
Right.
on the issue of a capital budget, if the United States government says, "God, we need the equivalent of 700 large nuclear power plants built in this country over the next 5 years," which means, gas, coal, of course, nuclear, maybe these small modular reactors, etc. But how are we going to do that? Well, we don't want the US government to borrow money and then loan it out or give it to someone to build a power plant. We want them to print the money and loan it to the power plant company. They will pay it back if they're good businessmen. And, Trump and other bankers are pretty good at identifying a good businessman. So we're going to loan them the money. They're going to establish a productive base from which they will earn a profit. And if we keep the interest rates down around 1 or 2%, basically to just pay for the handling of the loan over a period of 20 years or something, uh, then they have the debt. We don't have a debt. We've just created the credit so that they can take the physical resources of our country, our labor power and our material, and put it into some form that dramatically increases the wealth producing power of the nation. That's very different than creating a lot of money and then putting it into the international, capital markets where we're buying and selling to make money on currency valuations, going up and down, the currency going up and down. We're going to speculate on that, which is what the bankers do all day. And we want our money when it's printed to go for building America. Period. No, nobody else gets it. Once it's out there, it's out there. People can do what they want with it. If we don't like what they do with it, we'll tax them. But that has
Yes.
to be done
Right.
democratically. So the idea is get the nation focused on what we need to build and then go build it. Find the resources to do it and do it. And that's the kind of person that Trump is.
Yeah.
That's the kind of person that Chris White is. I think that's his name. The energy
Right.
secretary.
Right.
He's a real go-getter to go build stuff. And that's what we need. We got to just build our country. And if we start doing that in a serious way, and I think that's Trump's going to run into big fights, as he's already sort of identified by really hitting on Jerome Powell pretty hard over the last couple of days. Um,
Right.
that's the real fight. And if people understand that that's the fight and why we have to go through that, then we can save our country. And I think that's what Trump understands, and I think that's what he believes. And we just have to get people engaged in that debate. How many power plants? Where are we going to put them? How are you going to train the workforce? How are we going to secure our supply chain so we always have access to the output of these industries? Those are the questions that we need to ask and create the credit where necessary to do it.
That's the American system.
That's the American way.
That's
So
the American system. Right. In case anybody doesn't get it, that is the American system. That's what
Mhm.
our forefathers put into place, as led by Hamilton, correct?
Right. Exactly.
Um, and that is basically what I think what you just described there is is the national banking system.
Hmm.
Um, and that is what Trump is like intuitively doing. Well, I don't he hasn't gone that far yet, but you can tell he's going in that direction. Um, Now, can you tell us, make it a little more clear what the tariffs have to do with this? Because they do have a lot to do with it, and so many people just don't get it. And so, some are being and they're being intentionally misled because you're trying to push the American banking system, the American system,
Right.
and we've got the oligarchs slash British pushing their financial system, and they're, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're feeding the misinformation out there about tariffs, or have a lot to do with it. So can you straighten us all out on the tariff thing?
Well, the thing I think that's important to understand, first of all, is that until 1913, we did not even have a congressional budget. And the reason for that was every time the Congress decided to do something, they created a vehicle that would extinguish the debt of that something, uh, you know, so that you never started something that you weren't raising the funds through tariffs, through excise taxes, through other vehicles of revenue generation to pay for it. So if you wanted to do something, you had to come up with a way to pay for it. And what the problem was is that the central banking system that the British were setting up throughout the 1800s,
Mm.
well, it had complete control over the gold denominated reserves of the world. And the United States, they wanted to get us into that system. Now, Lincoln, with his national banking system, got us out of that, and he started printing the greenbacks, which were used to create an unbelievably effective industrial agricultural growth in the United States, which allowed us to win the Civil War, but also to create the kind of industry that by 1876, at the centennial celebration in Philadelphia, we had these huge buildings filled with all the new inventions that we had created. Now, tariffs were a very important part of that whole process because what you did with a tariff was two things. Number one, you generated revenue, because we needed revenue. Government needs revenue to run. So you got to generate some revenue that way. And the second thing is you protect
Mhm.
industries that you want to grow in the United States. But right now, there is efficient, I should say efficient, but nevertheless, an out, a foreign source for a certain product that they can sell cheaper because they've got an established, capital investment that they can go right to produce, and we have to start the whole thing from scratch. So it's almost like the pharmaceuticals today. We have to build new pharmaceutical industries so we can produce all these things that we should have ability to produce for ourselves. Well, to get that, we're going to have to tell these companies, look, we need to produce this, and here's the price we're going to have to sell it for. Therefore, we're going to tax you to the point that a consumer will have to pay 2 or 3% more for your product than for ours, so that we can sell our product in our market, so that we can establish this industry as functional. Then, of course, after you get it going, you can say, well, we can pull back on the tariffs and let the competitive spirit more efficiently reign. But the tariff is to protect us, and Now, in some cases, but those are the two useful sides of a tariff. The other thing is this sort of antagonistic approach. You know, we want to stop you. We don't want you to grow. We don't want you to have development. So we're going to put tariffs on you that take away your markets so that your industries are crippled. And, you know, I think some people are thinking that way about China, which I think is stupid in my view. But the main thing is to build us. If we build us according to American methods, we won't have any problem with China. You know, it might be a fight, a competitive fight, but we won't. They can't take us anywhere if we're acting like Americans.
Right.
So
Right.
does that
And
help?
yes, it does. And it also helps in being worried about China. You don't
Mhm.
need to worry about China. We build ourselves up, and you don't have to worry about China.
Exactly.
Um, and that's a whole other story there, what goes on with them. But yes, I think that helps a lot. Now, so now we've got an idea of what it is you guys are trying to get done, and to go into everything the Promethean Pack is trying to accomplish would take, a whole series of these.
Yeah.
Uh, but I am chipping away at it with various guests.
Good.
But so that is like uh, a a kernel of what you're doing. That was like the focus point of what you're trying to accomplish there. But now tell us how you were received
Mhm.
there in Washington. Tell us about that.
Well, it was so, it was very interesting. I know the best word to put it. It was very interesting. We didn't know how it was gonna go. None of us had done this before.
It was
Right,
energizing.
It was
right.
energizing, that's the word. And, we had no idea how much literature we could even bring into the Capitol office buildings because they do have a magnetometer. So we were even wondering, my gosh, should we only bring such and such numbers of literature? All they're looking for when you go through security is you can't have a knife, you can't have a weapon, right? Otherwise, frankly, you could probably bring a suitcase. So we didn't quite bring a suitcase, but um, so that was one thing. And then getting into the offices, it was very interesting. Our very first meeting was a young lady from Alabama, an aide, who had just gotten out of college and kind of naive, but very sweet, very engaged in what we were saying, wanted to know what we were talking about. So we kind of realized after this first meeting that we knew, in our field anyway, we knew a lot more than they do. And so it just helped us to enjoy getting to know some of these people. And in some offices, we were given maybe 15 minutes, and you could tell they were kind of look at their watch, trying to rush us out. And, because it was, for one thing, it was a busy week. It was a budget week. And this is the last week, March. We got there started March 26th. So that week. And so, but in some offices, I'll tell you, it was so amazing the interest in what we had to say. Uh, we'll show you a picture shortly, but there's one office in Michigan where the the aide, his name was Michael Spiro. I mean, he gave us 45 minutes. He was just on
And
everything
that was an office in DC though, right?
in
Yeah,
DC. All
yeah.
these offices are in DC.
Yeah,
Yes.
right,
Um,
right. You
uh,
mentioned Michigan, but
Yeah,
he was
because he was
representing
a
Michigan,
Michigan
correct?
Republican, who,
Right.
he worked for her, and, uh, he was just because she is so pro-Trump, and we'll show you the indications of that on her wall when we get to the pictures, but, he was very engaged and excited. For example, that we have in Michigan, one of our members, Susan Kokinda, is the vice chair of coalitions of the state Republican Party. So, that really made clear to him we have some clout in the organizing and the outreach throughout the state. Um, that was very interesting. In one office, we met an aide, Troy Nell's office, where the aide was familiar with LaRouche and really just very open to exploring these ideas. So, it depended on both the time with some of these people, whether they were really in a rush. In some cases, they're very naive and but open and willing to listen. And so I think overall, I was very pleased that the respect we received and the time we were given in the meetings. And one office, we were just talking to the front desk, and at the front desk are the interns, and they're generally in their 20s, and they're bright. They're, politically savvy. They're there to try to probably make a career. They probably study political science. They're, you know, uh, and so we were talking to the front desk intern, and an aide heard in the back room, and he came in and he said, "You know what? I'll have a meeting with you." So we probably had a half an hour meeting with him that had not been scheduled. And then we found out that another team of Dorothy and Frank had been at that office a couple days ago. We didn't know. It was kind of hard to coordinate everything every day because, we had a long day and trying to figure out who we met with. And we did keep a log. I mean, we do know all the people we met. We got cards from all the offices of the aides we met with and the congressman. But 2 days earlier, turns out a team had already been there and dropped off literature. So had he looked at the literature? I don't know. But it's that kind of surprise. And I'll give you another example, which is that uh, Dorothy and Frank were in an office. They were briefing an aide for Congressman Jim Jordan. And so they were briefing the aide, and the door opens for the congressman's office, and out comes a line of people. And at the end of it is Congressman Jim Jordan. And so he sees Frank's hat, and we'll show you the hat. It's a red hat. It says, "Relax. It's just a red hat." And Congressman Jordan goes up to him and shakes his hand, and like 3 times, I love your hat. And so that gave Dorothy and Frank a chance to brief him why we're at his office. He took literature personally, and that's the kind of surprises. So the days were never the same. Nothing was monotonous or anything like that. It was, you just didn't know how things were going to work out. Another quick example, Peter and I were down at the cafeteria, the congressional cafeteria. I was kind of around the corner, so I didn't see this. But a woman comes up to Peter and she says, "I love your hat." And he starts organizing her and gives her his card and a
And the
leaflet
literature.
and the literature. And she said, "Well, you have to come up to my office." And he realizes, he looked at her, she's a congresswoman. This was Congresswoman Harshbarger from Tennessee. So we did go up to her office later. So those are some of I mean, we have more stories, but that's the kind of surprise that just kind of made the day. You just never knew who you're going to intersect.
Right. And one of my points I want to get across in this interview is not only what your mission is, but if people of this nation want to get something done, you've got to just go do it.
Right.
And then these good things can happen. All
Hmm.
the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then you regroup and you go back in again with what you've learned. But that's how these good things happen. I mean, it's kind of like you could say you got lucky, but you make your luck, right?
Well,
You
exactly.
make your luck by actually doing something. You went in there and did it. You didn't know exactly how to do everything or what
Well,
was
we
going to
didn't.
happen. But look what you came away with.
Right.
Yeah.
These
We
people
didn't.
are not going to forget you.
Oh, no, I think there was a buzz, from our
Right.
interventions, and, in one case, Troy Nell's office, that meeting was set up not by well, not by a constituent, it was actually set up by one of our members here who's been working with the office, because our congressman is Al Green. I mean, we don't have a heck of a lot to work with. So, but my friend Craig took on the mission of working with some of the Republican offices in the area in the state, and Troy Nels is one, and that's the office where we met with a really pro LaRouche aide. So and that that was set up by Craig largely.
Well, also I think you have have either shown already or you will show this little 5-minute video of our team being interviewed in front of the Capitol during our visit there. And while we were waiting for the cameraman that did that to show up, we had, well, we were just sitting around talking
With the former congressman.
with a former congressman
Mhm.
from Michigan, Bentivolio.
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 Congressman retired Congressman Bentivolio.
And so anyway, around the corner, I could see a group coming, and I looked closely at one of the guys in there, and I said, "Mr. Nells, is that you?" And extended my hand and went over, got him, and he stopped. You know, we have a picture of him with our team, and
He's a Republican congressman from Congressman Troy Nells.
yeah, Troy Nells.
Here in Texas.
He's been a very strong supporter of President Trump.
Yep.
Here in Texas. So that was fun. You know, it's those kinds of things happening is just it's just part of fun. And then one thing that is astounding, and most people don't see this. They do, but they don't understand much of it. But for instance, we were in the Library of Congress. And if you look on the walls of the Library of Congress, there are statues and busts, you know, in relief and full scale. And you see names that most people wouldn't even recognize, like Solon or Lycurgus, or of course, people would recognize Beethoven and Shakespeare. They might not recognize, well, they would recognize Plato, but the whole bunch of names that were common cultural icons in the day when this stuff was built, which most people today are not familiar with because the importance of these people has been degraded or left out of the books. It's like what most people think about Benjamin Franklin. He was an old man with a kite in a thunderstorm, and that's really all he was.
Had
And
a lot of witty saying.
yeah, it's it's and he was a womanizer, of course. But
Yes, got to
but
get that in there.
yeah, but the thing is, if you understand Franklin, I mean, here was a guy who in his teens was in London, and he got involved in what were called the Hellfire Clubs, which is based on
Right.
this idea of do your own thing, whatever feels good, do it, which you know came back in the '60s in a big way. But he was involved in that, and then he woke up to that and said, "This is nuts." And a paper he had written about this philosophy, he tracked down every one except for I think two. He wasn't able to find and destroy because he totally realized how screwed up this ideology was, because it was based on the idea of indifference to good or evil. Just do whatever feels good. And so he was
The
he,
60s. Yeah.
yeah, so he broke out of that and was very much influenced by a governor in Pennsylvania by the name of Logan, who was a correspondent with a whole group of thinkers in Europe, and the most important of which was a guy named Gottfried Leibniz. And it's from Gottfried Leibniz that our Declaration of Independence gets the idea of the pursuit of happiness. Because what Leibniz calls happiness is, he also calls it felicity. But it's an idea that your felicity, the happiness you have, comes from your intervention in the world to make it better, from doing good,
Right.
which is what Cotton Mather wrote a whole book about in the 1600s. You know, or something, it was called How to Do Good or something.
I'm doing good.
I'm doing
Yeah.
good. And
Yeah.
Franklin actually had read that and studied that. And people don't know that this is what our leaders, they are very profound people. They are people of a quality of mind which we rarely encounter today. And we used to be called the Latin farmers, you know, because the farmers could read Latin and Greek. And that's that tradition of intellectual freedom. That was why freedom and free speech, etc., was so important, because the United States was built on the idea that the individual person has the right to their ideas, and they can go out and broadcast them, they can act on them, and no oligarchy, no aristocracy can say, you can't do that because my
family says that's bad, and
Right.
so they it was a completely a break with centuries, actually millennia, of the tradition of empire. So our nation is unique in a very, very important way, which is not stressed and not thoroughly understood in America's school system. We don't, we would say things about it, but we don't really give the kids the background and understanding that they need. And that's what that's what we're finding, in the population, which is why what we're doing, what Promethean Action is doing, is something that LaRouche foresaw in the 1950s when he got back from World War II. And he saw that the people that he had fought with in World War II were turning to taking care of themselves, don't make waves, don't get in trouble with politically, just take care of business, make sure you have enough money to raise your family and don't worry about things. Of course, this is the Red Scare stuff too, in the 1950s. So
Right.
LaRouche said, wait a minute, something's wrong about this. And so he began to very seriously look at, well, how does an economy really work? And that's when he got the idea that it comes out of the creative mind of the individual, and the government exists to provide the pathways required for an individual to turn his idea into a power of production for the population as a whole. That's the thing that our country is. No other country on earth is based on that. Only the United States.
Yeah. Right. And LaRoche was a genius, and not to take
Mhm.
anything away from him, but literally, it's as simple as this. It's not like this guy came out with all these ideas and you might love him or you might not. All he was doing was putting forth to us what our forefathers
Right.
created this country on. This is what it all came from. These philosophies, and it came from their minds. And what is freedom, right? What did they mean by that? They did not mean do your own thing and sit out on a grassy knoll and smoke pot, right?
Right.
Um, yeah,
Uh,
it's just not what they meant at all. And when you learn these things, like from Leibniz and these other people nobody have ever heard of, or so many of
mhm.
us haven't, now you start learning where this stuff came from. It wasn't just a bunch of loudmouth rabble rousers who wanted freedom, you know?
Right.
But
And
and I'm saying this because I want the listeners to they're not gonna get all the they're not gonna there's so much to take in. They need to, like, grab onto these bits and pieces and do a little research, you
Yeah.
know?
right. And I would also recommend to everyone listening, get involved in at least your local congressional office and get to know the staff. Call them up. Go in is even better. Start getting activated, um, and make your voice heard. And if you ever have an opportunity to go to Washington, D.C., definitely set up a meeting with your congressmen, your senators. And I will say, from what Peter was saying, just to say, it was such a privilege to be in our nation's capital. I haven't been there since I was a child. And to see this incredible architecture, it is the most beautiful city in the United States, as far as I know. It it was stunning. And I felt privileged that, oh, besides the fact that cherry blossoms had just popped, that was incredible, but that we were there where all these great founders had once been thinking and acting. So I think if we take that in, we are so blessed to be Americans. We have such a great system. And now we've been given this great opportunity under President Trump to take that system out and make it alive. And that's what's happening. And I think that's part of what the process was, that why we went to Washington, D.C.
Very good way of putting all that. And one of the messages is Trump and his team are doing great, but they can't do it alone.
Yeah.
And this is the way of getting involved. And minimally, you can call and write your congressman,
Yep.
uh, you know, But yes, when you and I have visited my and other congressional offices in DC, and they do, as a rule, they roll out the red carpet for you,
Mhm.
really,
Yeah,
even if what you're presenting isn't anything they agree with.
right.
But it's a very good experience. And so you wanted to show us some, did you want to show us some
Yeah, sure.
slides or
Yes, we would.
things?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see if we can get through the technology of sharing one screen here.
Okay.
uh,
So here is our team in front of the Capitol,
Part of our team.
part of our
We
team.
didn't have everybody there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a little close up of us. This is the group that was waiting for the cameraman, and that's when Troy Nells showed up.
And we'll show you a picture.
Yeah. Now this is the Red Hat Brigade, and if you look closely, you can see this says, "Relax, it's just a red hat." And this caught the eye of numerous people. I mean, I'll bet it was hundreds of people.
Frank said we were walking down the hall and a custodian did a double take and said, "I love your hat." And so that gave Frank the opportunity to organize a custodian in the office building.
Yeah.
Funny.
So anyway,
that's
that
awesome.
It
so,
is.
so he we then each of us was on a separate team.
Yep.
So this wasn't planned, but nevertheless, that is the way it worked out.
We called
Kinda neat.
ourselves the Red Hat Brigades representing the blue collar workers
Right. And there we are again.
in front of the Capitol.
And this is a congressman from
Alabama.
That's the aide to a congressman
Right.
from Alabama. This is Troy Nells here, and he just walked around the corner, and our cameraman had not yet showed up, and so yeah, he was just coming back to Congress from the weekend. This was on a Monday,
Yeah.
on the 24th of March.
And we had just been in his office that morning, so we were able to tell him, how that meeting went. He was very gracious to give us his time and get a picture with us.
And here is the
That's
cherry
great.
blossoms.
Yeah.
There are the cherry blossoms right there that were just popping when we got there. It must have been God sending a message.
And this is the office. Yeah, right. This is the office in Michigan of Lisa McLean, and Michael Spiro is the aide there with Sarah on the right, Michael Spiro, myself, and Peter. And there was a message on the wall that he was very proud of because Lisa McLean was vying to be the chair for the conference chair for the Republican Party if Elise Stefanik was going to leave. Remember, she was going to possibly become the UN
Yes.
ambassador. So you can read the message. It just says, she says to President Trump, just for your information, I'm running to replace Elise for conference chair. I would welcome any advice or guidance you may have. And Trump writes, in his typical bold, just be yourself a winner, Donald J. Trump. So that office, that's where we had the 45-minute meeting. They're just so pro-Trump. It was one of the best.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then on the
That's
left,
just like Trump. That is something Trump would just say, you
yes,
know?
of course, they framed it, right? So
Yeah.
Congressman Ezel's office from Mississippi, that was a really great meeting. Congressman Quaylar's office, that was a new aide in the office. And Sarah had brought newspapers because she's in the district right near Congressman Quaylar from Texas. So,
And he's a Democrat.
yeah,
But we were welcome in the office. I mean, these people are trained. They're trained to be polite and welcoming.
yeah.
And
Right.
the only time we ran into what I thought was sort of an abrasive greeting was in the Senate. There, the staff there is a little bit more arrogant about their elevated prestige for being in the Senate. But other than that, it was pretty good.
So one of the people I know from DC that I work with on the phone, um, he was wanted to meet with me, and we wanted to meet, and then I got him to join us in a meeting with Randy Weber, Congressman Weber of Texas. So Curtis was thrilled, And you'll see the next picture shows you a bigger picture of the office. We weren't always allowed to take pictures. We just assumed we could, and then we intersected an office that asked us, please, no pictures. We had that actually a few times. But for the most part, they're very friendly to have pictures taken, so you can kind of see the back and forth Peter was involved in with the aide there. Oh, and this is the funniest thing. This is on the left, Al Green's office. On the right, that's the door and the walls near it. All these congressmen, Democrats, like AOC and the squad, they have all these little sticky notes and little thank you notes, and their doors are locked. We had no Republican office locked, but some of these Democrats, they're playing up like they're being persecuted by Trump. They're standing up to Trump. So that's what their offices often look like. Pretty bizarre.
This is AOC's office.
Right. That's right. AOC's office. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I was her, I'd want to hide too.
Yes.
Yeah,
Good
right.
point. And on the left is Peter with Congressman Heridopoulos. This was a chance meeting that Peter helped us set up. We went to the office early in the week. You can't really see it, but in the background, there's a picture of the space shuttle. So that caught our eye. Turns out Cape Canaveral is in his district. And before he became a congressman, he was a history major. And when we brought up the American system, he said, oh, you mean Henry Carey? That's a name most people don't know. And he had done his thesis on John F. Kennedy. Very excellent guy. He happened to be in the office on Friday when we went back again. And so, obviously when he saw Peter's hat, he just had to take a few minutes and talk to us. And
his aide was very gracious. We actually talked for a while, and then the congressman came in. So it was a very, very good discussion.
And on the right is Congressman Andy Biggs in the middle, and Greg and Hunter flanking him. Again, this was not a scheduled meeting. Congressman Biggs is from Arizona. But again, because of that hat, when he saw that hat in his office, he came right out. He wanted to talk to us, our fellows there. And obviously, when we had an opportunity, we got literature to the congressman as well as to the aides. And by the way, we got all the literature out that we had planned to get out in D.C. that week, which was really great.
We visited somewhere between 250 and 300 offices.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. And this is Dale Strong, I believe, from Alabama. Again, just happened to be that Dorothy and Frank were in the office talking to an aide. He came out, he saw Frank's hat. I love your hat. And he said, I'm going to give you a hat. And there he is, Alabama for Trump.
This is a fellow, Marcia and I were going up to meet with somebody on the third floor in the, I guess it was the Longworth building. And we got on the elevator, and there was a distinguished fellow there, and he saw my hat and said, where are you guys going? I said, what?
He said, I love your hat.
Yeah, right.
What are you doing here? We briefed him just a little bit, and he said, where are you going? We said, well, we have to get to the third floor. We're almost late for a meeting. No, you're not. You're coming to the fifth floor. And he brought us up, and we didn't know he was a congressman until he brought us, then we realized, oh, that's Congressman Derek Van Orden. So that's sometimes you have to be ready, whether you're in an elevator, a cafeteria, on the streets. You just never know.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
It was fun.
What elevator pitches are for, right?
Exactly. Elevator speeches, right.
Right.
And this is Sarah, who, again, after a couple of days, and she'd never done anything like this before. She's fairly new to our movement. She went into the Senate building and came across John Cornyn, cornered him, and got a picture with the local newspaper, which, again, can happen without even expecting it. Oh, yeah, this is another example. This is Congressman Tiffany from Wisconsin. Again, Dorothy and Frank were in his office. He saw the hat. He had to come over and get briefed by us, and took our literature. And that's really great, because one of the people I'm working with, that's his congressman. We had not been able to schedule a meeting before, so that just worked out. And this is in Congressman Cloud's office. Just giving you a sense, we were, just going through the literature with these people, giving them our ideas and getting back and forth with them. Can't leave out the cherry blossoms. This was just gorgeous, and obviously enjoyed the beauty of it. This is inside.
It is
Ye
beautiful there this time of year.
It is
Yeah.
unbelievable, and this is Union Station, and I just wanna say one thing, if you look on the outside, there's a whole series of sayings that are on the outside of the, building of Union Station. This is the metro station. This is where all the whether it's Amtrak or the local, subway, the, as they call the metro, trolleys and buses, they all intersect in here, and, here, listen to this quote. It's at the outside on the top. It says, "Fire, greatest of discoveries, enabling man to live in various climates, use many foods, and compel the forces of nature to do his work." And then inside, they have a statue of Prometheus because Promethean action took our name from this mythology of the god Prometheus who gave man fire, who gave man science, who gave man the arts. So even in the metro station, you have this stunning example that of the culture that Peter was speaking of earlier, of our founders. Or this is in the 1800s, but our previous generations who really did appreciate uh, the fight for a renaissance, which is really ultimately what we have to create, a renaissance.
I
This
think
is
we
a
are creating that.
I
Yeah.
think you're exactly right. This is, at the Library of Congress, another gorgeous building. You have it's just there's so much to see, and you could take all day in all these buildings. On the left is the reading room, and you wanna describe the right.
And this is Marcia and I especially. I had a friend of mine who went to the Library of Congress a few months ago, and he brought home a library card, and bragged about having become a member of the Library of Congress, and now he had a library card. So I said, "Well, I'm going to get one of those." So we went to the Library of Congress, and of course, we had a little tour. We were able to see the various buildings and stuff. In the Library of Congress, I
Okay.
was able to ask after getting my library card. I was able to ask for an original copy of Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard Almanac, which is just paperback size, actually smaller. It's very thin little volume you can stick in your back pocket very easily. And this was actually read by somebody in 1750, probably more than one person. So it was just sort of exciting to be able to go in and actually put my hands on something that someone else had the same thing, 300 years ago almost.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and there we are visiting an old relative. And, and I will take us off the sharing button here.
Well, that was really enjoyable. Um,
Well, for
Not
us
only a great message, but that was a very the message is great. What we need to do is needed to be known,
Right.
and, what you accomplished is needed to be known so other people can be encouraged about, helping to accomplish these things. But those slides and everything are very enjoyable, and to hear your experience, how you were received,
yeah.
uh these congressmen and senators and their staff, pretty much welcomed you with open arms, and it helps to have a funny hat.
Yeah.
So,
Can I make one?
uh,
Yeah, I just want to make one
yeah, go
one
ahead.
one comment, which something you said made me think of this idea of freedom. I think it's important
Ah,
for people
yeah.
to distinguish. Freedom comes from God. Freedom does not come from the lawful organization of society. Liberty comes from the lawful organization of society. But freedom is something that is given to us by God. We are able to discover lawful principles that govern the physical universe, which allows us to transform nature so that we can be fruitful and multiply. And that's freedom. We're not like animals. We're human. Made in God's image. And that, I think, is something that people ought to reflect on more than they do.
I think so too. And if you really wrap your wits around that definition of freedom you just gave, that is an extremely, that's very free to have that power,
Yeah.
right? Of that kind of creation. To just think, people should think of themselves. This is what you're able to do. This is what you have free, and you were born with it.
Yep.
The government didn't give this to you. Uh, in the Declaration of Independence, when they talked about these things, they meant, we have this, back off and stop trying to take it away. I mean, they weren't saying, please give it to us. So it's like, we have it, and stay in your place. But anyway, it was great talking with you guys.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you
and
very much.
I
It was a pleasure for us also. Thank you.
I'm glad, and when do you have any idea when you're going back to DC?
Well, hey, I'd be happy to go. So
Well, let me point out what we did was extraordinary, and it took the big fellow that you saw, Greg, was a very important part of that in terms of the cost of doing something like that. And it's important for people to realize that we will do that as often as we can afford to do it, but it takes a lot of money. We were able to do that, but we can't do that every month. maybe
No,
maybe not
no.
every year.
But this is something will be done again, needs to be done again,
yes,
and we wanna spread the word on this because we need more and more people getting involved.
and just so you
Um,
know, we're following up all these contacts, putting them into a capability of getting emails to them and start getting back to them. So they will be followed up.
well, so what you did there is continuing on,
Oh
really.
yes. Mhm.
So
Yeah.
this is great. Well, thank you guys. Great having you, and I look forward to having you on again sometime.
I look forward to it.
After our next visit.
After your next visit,
Okay.
you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
Scott. Bye bye.
Thank you. I hope that gave you all some encouragement regarding how just a few educated people can make a change. Trump can't do it all alone. He needs people like us to learn what the founders of this country knew and installed into our Constitution, from which we have strayed. We have been dumbed down so much that much of this is foreign to some of the most well-intentioned patriots. I highly suggest you go to PrometheanAction.com and see what these people have to say, and listen to some of their live and recorded discussions. And then, as more educated citizens listen and watch this, you can call your congressmen and senators and visit them if you can, and educate them. You'll also find Promethean Action information in the show notes and in the resources tab of my website at www.takecontrolofyourliberty.com. And please like, subscribe, and share so you and others can learn more about how to take control of your liberty, because you don't want anyone doing that but you.